Hey, something a little different today. We're going to compare Twilight to Underworld. All of them. First and foremost, I love both of these series a lot. So this will be a little bit difficult. I had to rewatch them and rethink them and even take a little bit of notes, which for movies this dumb was kind of ridiculous. But it's worth looking at. Now, I was going to compare Resident Evil to Underworld, but Underworld and Twilight both deal with werewolves versus vampires, and they're both kind of like romantic and somewhat action-packed. Now, a little bit different levels of each with both series, so let's dive right into it. Twilight, the first one, Catherine Hardwicke directed it, and I really like her as a director. She also did Red Riding Hood, which I think is excellent and just a great standalone movie and a really good Halloween movie. She directed the first Twilight, and it's got this blue tint and like a low-key like indie feel, and I enjoy the music, and the cast is pretty good, but the dialogue's awful, and that's not her fault. So I don't want to bash the writer, Stephanie Myers, but like everyone knows, like Twilight's not like the greatest novel or series of novels ever written, and the dialogue is ridiculous, and it is quotable because it's so ridiculous. So there's like the spider monkey quote, the foster dad matchmaker, La Push, this is the skin of a killer, Bella. That's one of my favorite lines. Me and my wife make fun of that every time. It's a soap opera. The series is a soap opera, and I don't want to mark that against it, because there's something to be said about soap operas, because people do love them, and like the world over, people really do love soap operas, and there's something to be said about the audience loving the characters and wanting to see good things happen to them or see them overcome obstacles, whether it's social or like literal. So if you love the characters in Twilight, I think that's awesome. I love the characters in Twilight, but I think there's a lot of negativity and harshness thrown at the entire series because there are probably way more people who have seen the posters or seen like a little bit, like a clip of it or something, and they think, well, it's just about a love triangle between Edward, Bella, and Jacob. And if you've watched this series as many times as I have, which is like an embarrassing amount and an appalling amount for something so fast foody, it's not about them really at all. It's about the supporting cast and the families, and it's a really interesting soap opera, and I think a pretty well done soap opera. So the first Twilight movie is really pretty solid as an indie movie, which of course did very, very well. But the second one is a different director. They didn't bring back Catherine Hardwicke, and it is Hollywood as Hollywood can get, man. It's a lot more money pushed into it for a lot of just fluff, and there's a lot of, I'm going to say, wasted time and wasted scenes. Now, a lot of them are funny, but let me say that Edward and Bella, like from the get-go, I think just on screen, Pattinson and Kristen Stewart, they have no chemistry, and it is apparent and funny from the start, but it gets so cringy and irritating by the end of the fifth movie. So if I want to break down all the movies, they meet in the first one, and Jacob's introduced, and then in the second one, they break up. Shocking. And Jacob and Bella spend more time together. And the third one is like the real love triangle. So 3 triangle, that's the third one. I feel like they should have stopped there, and I know Stephanie Myers wrote more books and there's more stuff with these characters, but Breaking Dawn Part 1 and Breaking Dawn Part 2 are pretty bad. Like they're the worst of the series, and they didn't need to split them up into 2. They're just ripping off the Harry Potter producers and trying to get more money, which they did. I mean, this is like I think a multi-billion-dollar movie series, and good for them. But Breaking Dawn Part 1, Part 2 could have been one movie, or it could have been no movies, and that actually would have been better to just leave it at 3, because you get this villain, Victoria, in like the first 3 basically, and she's a solid villain who's intelligent and fierce and murderous, and she has pretty good motives. And then you move to the Volturi, which are just they're there. They're just kind of there to foil the main characters, and they have very little actual, like, apparent motivation, which it kind of, again, just by the time you're done with the fifth movie in this soap opera, it gets really, really ridiculous, and it's been ridiculous for some time. Like I said, Bella as a character, I don't like, and I like romantic comedies, I like romantic movies, and I like when there's, like, unintelligent or interesting or just like a cool main chick and her life's just not going right and she has to figure something out or learn new skills or get rid of the toxic people in her life to become better or live her best life. That is not what happens in this movie at all, dude. None of them. Bella is a blank slate with absolutely no personality. Hate to say it, but of her friends, of her three friends, she has like two friends, and she's the third. She's the least pretty actress of those three, and actually, it turns out probably the least talented actress of those three. So she's like a dud and like a blank zero, a blank space for, I think, other girls in the audience to project their own personality onto the character, because the character has no personality and everyone's in love with her automatically for like absolutely no reason. And there's, like I said, there's a decent villain in Victoria, but I think the worst villain and the most vicious villain is Jacob, who starts out, Taylor Lautner's character starts out like a nice, normal, kind of boring teenage boy, and by the end of the fifth one, I think he's gone just a complete jerk and a complete creep. So what a character arc for him there. I would also say that the first movie very nearly ruined Muse and very nearly ruined baseball for me, so that by combining those two things, that is terrible. I will say on the plus end, though, the men and women in this saga, in this series, they're all represented fairly equally, and some are good and some are bad. It doesn't make any overbearing or irritating message about like one side being better than the other, or it certainly doesn't say anything political at all, and it doesn't really say anything about class struggle either, even though it easily could. But I mean, if anything, it's in favor of rich people, so there's that. I was surprised the first time I saw a vampire being killed in Twilight. I was surprised and delighted at how over the top the violence is with it. So if you're a dude, especially, and you've never seen Twilight and you're like, well, this is all just about romance and stuff, there are fights, there are kills, there is a war going on, kind of. It's interesting enough, like from an action standpoint, and I think from a design for monsters and characters, having the wolves turn into giant wolves, like the werewolves don't turn into wolf man, okay? They turn into big wolves, and I think that made it look way better, way cooler, way more interesting. So yeah, that's Twilight, and we'll compare it to Underworld, which I love. The first one introduces you to this world, the Underworld, where werewolves and vampires are fighting, much like Twilight. But this is like a modern day war with bullets and cool Matrix vibes throughout this movie. Dude, Danny McBride wrote several of these movies, the Underworld ones, and they're so stylish and so brutal and so heavy metal. So it's a lot more action than Twilight. And at first, I would say the romance is probably worse and more forced. And Kate Beckinsale and I think Scott Speedman, they have even less chemistry than Edward and Bella in the original Twilight, which is that's no small feat right there. The war is more intense, and it's been brewing and fighting and going on longer, so I feel like the stakes are higher, and the stakes are higher because pretty much any character in Underworld could die at any moment. You don't really feel like anybody has any safety, which they're immortals, right? So they should be immortal, but the immortals die quite a bit. Yeah, they're pretty metal, and they're pretty fast-paced, and they're pretty short. But the first one's solid and introduces everything well. The second one goes back, not chronologically, but they go back and explain like the origins of the werewolves and vampires, and they come from the same family, and they're warring and stuff. And the second one's okay. The third one, Rise of the Lycans, my favorite by far. Absolutely awesome. It's all set in the past. It's very, very romantic, and you feel bad for these characters who are in love, and there's so many problems going on and preventing them from being together. And I love the emotional conflict and the actual warfare conflict going on in it. And Bill Nye, what a champion, what a team player, dude. Bill Nye is in almost all of them, I think, at least a little bit. So he's mostly in the first one, a little bit in the second, and he's all throughout the third one, and he's so good in the third one, my goodness. Michael Sheen, Aro from the Volturi in Twilight, is in Underworld as Lucian, and he's so much better in Underworld. He has such a better character, and he does so much more cool and interesting and badass stuff, and he totally carries the third movie. I love the third movie so much. The fourth movie in the Underworld series is so bad that it's embarrassing. Like, I watched it again yesterday and took notes. It was embarrassing to watch. I think it's an embarrassment that it was made like that. Danny McBride, I don't think had anything to do with the fourth one, and it shows, dude. It's really, really terrible. They throw humans into the war, and you'd think, like, werewolves and vampires who've been fighting for hundreds and hundreds of years would completely destroy us, and we would be at a huge disadvantage, and that's not what happens at all. Like, humans are just stupid and somehow yet somehow better than the immortals at fighting, which makes really no sense and does not make for a great movie. And they introduce like weird plot devices for no reason. They kind of start a new romance with the main character Celine, and that completely falls flat, and I hated the fourth one. The fifth one's completely forgettable as well. So let's comparing Twilight to Underworld. The fourth movie and the fifth movie are really not that great in both these series of 5 movies. The third one's probably my favorite in Twilight as well. I just like it when there's an actual romantic conflict and a real like physical danger element, and you have to have people teaming up to, save each other, or you have rivals teaming up now to save each other against a common enemy, which that happens in both the third installment of both series. So it's pretty close, but I'm going to give the edge to Underworld because I'm a dude and I like action and fighting and violence in these types of movies, and really in every type of movie. But it's more of an action movie, so it's more interesting to me, and it's usually all of them are about 90 minutes, so it's a little tighter and a little quicker, and you're done quickly, you're done faster. That's not to say that Twilight is much worse, though. So it's incredibly close, man. But I actually think the romance, if the romance wasn't so good in Underworld 3, I probably would have just said it's a dead tie. But Underworld beats Twilight for action. It beats it for the beauty of the production, which I should mention, Twilight has one of the most beautiful settings of any movie or movie series ever, with Forks, which is a real town in the Pacific Northwest. It's absolutely gorgeous, and those movies and those shots, especially in the first one, are just, there's nothing like it, man. You got to at least see Twilight 1 and then see if you like the rest of them. But I'll give the edge to Underworld. If you have the time, which it's a lot of time, check out both series, all the movies. They are entertaining. They do hold up fairly well, and you'll notice that some of them are better than others within the series, and I had a lot of fun comparing them and contrasting them to each other. Have a good one, you guys.